All right, I guess we're ready to get started.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Zanotti, and thank you all for being here today. We are going to be joined by four people you probably know, and they are, and I'm going to read just to make sure I get everything right here. The first one is Michael Allen. He is an author of 7 books, and he's the CEO of Allen Interactions. We're also joined by Julie Dirksen. She's a longtime e-learning designer and author of Design for How People Learn. Then we've got Clark Quinn. He designs and solutions aligned for how we think, work, and learn through Quinnovation, his company. And then we've got, last but not least, Will Thalheimer. He is an industry-leading consultant and researcher, and he's the president of Work Learning Research. Now, all of these four are e-learning stalwarts. They've been in the industry a long time, and they've gotten together almost 9 months ago on a project that's pretty interesting, and we're about to find out what they've been doing. So let's get started. Michael, what have you guys been up to? It's been quite a while. What are we all here for today?
Well, thanks, Rick, and there are a lot of us here today. I'm really excited about this. Maybe about 2,000 people, have hundreds anyway, which is really a tremendous force to do good in the world. Just a fantastic force to perhaps turn e-learning back on its path to be so helpful to all of us individually in our organizations. We've all seen the potential in e-learning and some terrific successes with it, but those successes, we feel, are too seldom seen today. And it's a regrettable pattern that seems to have pretty deep roots. And that's why we're undertaking this effort, is we feel like we need to get this on a better path as soon as possible, or else we may never be able to turn it around. You know, buyers don't know what to request and look for. Budgets are too limiting, and designers are given way too much content to deal with, and new designers see what everybody else is doing and pattern after that. And the situation is bad, we feel, and the opportunity is so wonderful. So we're doing the best we can to help both ourselves and everyone else realize what we have to do and commit to it. So, Rick, let me ask you to read the assessment that the four of us have put together of what it seems is happening today.
Sure, this is the preamble to the Serious eLearning Manifesto. We believe that learning technology offers the possibility for creating uniquely valuable learning experiences. We also believe, with a sense of sadness and profound frustration, that most e-learning fails to live up to its promise. We further believe that current trends evoke a future of only negligible improvements in e-learning design, unless something radical is done to bend the curve. Finally, we have concluded that in order to elevate e-learning to the height of its promise, we need to begin with a personal commitment to a new set of standards. Through continuous assessment of learner performance, the e-learning experience can optimize use of the learner's time, individualize the experience for full engagement, address needs, optimize practice, and prepare for transfer of learning to performance proficiency. Through our work in developing e-learning experiences and helping others do the same, we believe that we need to go beyond typical e-learning. Well, Michael, you pretty much hit that one right on the head. What exactly have you done?
Well, we've written the manifesto. It's a pledge that we're taking ourselves to promote better uses of the technology, and we hope that it's a manifesto that other people support and join with us in an effort to produce better learning successes for every learner who gives us their time. We hope to get people talking about important issues, not just the size and color and shape of bullet points, which I've seen in various discussions online, and others talking about should a multiple choice question have more than one choice to it, and so on. And while these topics do have some importance in their place, they're not the big topics. They're not the big problem. So what are those? What are the important topics? Well, as part of the manifesto, we listed some prevalent and unfortunate characteristics of today's e-learning. And let me read this list to you quickly. There are 8 values in this list, and maybe we'll have them up on the screen if we're lucky. Anyway, we see today's typical e-learning as being content-focused, loading too much content, squeezing out essential experience and practice. We see authoring efficiency as the focus, trying to minimize the amount of time an author spends and wasting learner time in the process. We see a focus on getting people in seats. Just a big attendance is sometimes scored as a big win, whether anybody is engaged or not. We see focus on just delivering knowledge with the assumption that content presentation leads to proficiency. We see fact testing as a focus where, testing short-term memory is one thing, but is that performance capability? Probably not. See one-size-fits-all designs where it doesn't matter what you answer to a challenge, you're going to get the same feedback that everybody else gets, and you're going to go on to the same next exercise, whether you're showing understanding or not. We have one-time events, thinking that one touch with people is going to change their performance in the future, and that's just wishful thinking that isn't going to happen, I think. And we see didactic feedback, correct, incorrect judgments that all of us forget right afterward. So those are the typical e-learning characteristics that we see today that we feel are unfortunately absorbing a lot of people's time and attention. And with what we know from research, work characterized this way doesn't add up to a serious effort to use e-learning technology to full advantage.
That's true. We're all going through a lot of this. And Julie, how deep is this problem, and what can we do?
Well, there's a question that I've seen Jane Bozarth ask at conferences, where she asks people how many of them would actually want to take the e-learning that they create, and it usually gets kind of a combination of sort of knowing chuckles and sort of sheepish looks, and it's really interesting why that's the case. I feel like I'm a big proponent that e-learning isn't always the solution, but there are problems to which e-learning is a really great solution, and the e-learning that we're seeing isn't necessarily living up to that. I feel like some of this work that we were doing on CD-ROM back in the early to mid-90s is better than a lot of the stuff that I see getting produced now. And when the rest of the world of technology has been moving forward in leaps and bounds, e-learning has been really pretty significantly stagnant. And there are a lot of reasons why that's happening, but I do think one of the big issues is that there's instructional design as a field is based on process models and not on design principles, and we haven't had good enough tools around design principles to help people do things well, because everybody I meet wants to do good work. I've never met an e-learning person who didn't want to do good work, and they get very frustrated about not being able to do good work. And so one of the things I think we as a field need to do is have a better baseline around design, which is a big part of the effort that we put into the manifesto.
Clark, what do you think?
I think the data is pretty clear that learners are staying away in droves. They're not interested in the experiences we're creating because they don't see the value. And if they're not seeing the value, we're not doing it right. The other side of the equation is we're not meeting the organization's needs. We are not creating the change in our people to keep up with the needs that organizations have. As a consequence, we're not aligned with how learners learn and what our business needs, and this is just crazy. Frankly, we're talking, if you think about the size of the industry, we're talking about not just millions, we're talking about tens of millions, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars of effort being wasted. That, I think, is pretty bloody deep.
Will, what do you think?
Well, Rick, this is a very deep problem. If you can imagine e-learning as being the ocean, and on the top of the ocean are our best e-learning programs, and on the floor of the ocean are our worst e-learning programs. And the ones at the top can be brilliant. They can be aligned with the learning research. They can be engaging, provocative. Some of them are even beautiful. But for the vast mass of e-learning programs that are produced today, they're just not effective. They're not living up to e-learning's promise. For example, one of the things we do in e-learning today is we tend to cram too much information into the learning program and not provide the learners with the instructional supports they need, for example, to help them remember. We don't provide them with realistic retrieval practice, with context alignment, with spacing. And another thing that we fail to do in e-learning, and it's one of our biggest missed opportunities, is to use the data that e-learning can collect to give ourselves feedback about how we're doing, to enable us to have those feedback loops to create sort of a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement so we can make our programs better. To overcome this bad e-learning problem, we need to first take personal responsibility. I do, my co-authors do, our trustees do. Everybody in the e-learning field needs to step up. And if you'll notice, when we release the manifesto, if you look at the 22 principles, they're written in the first person so that we can each individually commit to them. The second thing is that there's a myriad of factors that need to go into any e-learning program to make it effective. And the 22 principles from the manifesto are a really good place to start.
Okay, so we've talked about what's not great right now, what's typical in e-learning. And obviously I know you folks, I know all of you personally, and I know you don't believe in just rebuking what's going on in the industry today. And you have certain values that you've delineated. Can you talk about the values for, let's say, serious e-learning, something that makes it a little bit different, something that takes e-learning to a higher level?
Sure. And I'm going to start. One of the ones, the first set of values, is contents focused versus performance focused. What we see in the industry, and for good reasons, experts can't tell us what they do, and we work from a lot of content, and it makes it really easy to put up content, to provide a test, and it's understandable. But there's a problem with it. It's not effective. In cognitive science, that leads to what we call inert knowledge. You will study it and pass a test on it, and you go out in the real world where it's relevant, and it won't even get activated. To make learning stick, you need to focus on performance. You need to focus on not knowledge, but what can people do that they can't do now? What do they need to be able to do? We need to focus rapidly on that performance and work backwards, aligning our learning to make that happen. So that's one of the core shifts between serious e-learning and traditional learning we need to make.
All right. The next one we talked about is that a lot of typical e-learning focuses on being efficient for authoring. We all know about rapid authoring tools, all of those kinds of things. And I think that one of the things that's sort of happened to us as a field is learning and development people are frequently don't have a lot of control in an organization. And so there's a tendency when you don't have a lot of control or influence to focus on the things that you can control or influence. And so one of the big areas where we can see progress and see how to get better is our sort of authoring efficiency. Can I do this faster? Can I do it more easily? You know, that's what the technology has kind of been leading people towards. But ultimately, we are not adding to our value within the organization if we just focus on reducing our costs for authoring or our time for authoring. What we really need in order to be able to give value to the organization is to figure out how do we make something meaningful for learning or meaningful to the learners and meaningful in the broader business context. And then, as Will was mentioning, have a feedback loop so that we can see the effects of what we're doing, but also make the effects of what we're doing visible to broader stakeholders so that we don't kind of get caught up in a loop of, you know, smaller and smaller budgets and, you know, less and less time and money to do things, because that's, you know, that's a cycle of failure that I think that a lot of people are kind of experiencing right now.
Another one of my favorite principles is attendance-driven versus engagement-driven. There's this implicit belief that if we build it, it is good. So as long as they're there, as long as they're attending, we can make them stick through it, that this is going to lead to learning. So people are trying things like time next buttons. So we're not going to let them move on until they've spent so much time here. Like, that's going to make them pay attention. And it's just not. What we need to do is engage them. They have to understand why this is important. They have to understand why they should care. They should be making, we should be helping them understand why this is going to make a difference to them going forward. When we focus on engaging their interest and helping them recognize it, we're going to make a difference between just why they're, that they have to sit there and be required to be there for a certain amount of time.
Building on what Clark just said is the next serious e-learning value, which is authentic context as opposed to just knowledge delivery. If people just present the content to you, you may as a learner have no idea whether it's going to be usable and useful to you at all. And I've actually heard trainers say in classes that I've been in, I know this is kind of foreign, but trust me, someday you'll be glad you know this. So I want us just to go on this pledge that really we're going to reveal the relevance to you at some point, but not now. Why not now, And there's really an easy way to do it that I've found so effective in our work, and I believe it's a good place to start if you're not sure how to get going on all of this engagement stuff, and that is to create an authentic context. That is, a situation that a learner might well perceive themselves falling into. And then the question comes to their mind right away, what do I do? And as they're assessing that, they're really becoming a sponge for all the help that you can give them. Because I don't want to look like I don't know how to do this, and I don't want to make a mistake and want to screw up, So how do I solve this problem? Of course, if learners can demonstrate to you right away that they know how to solve this problem, then that's great. You want to push them on to another situation, because you really can't teach people things they already know. You can only waste their time going over it, and frustrating them. So presenting authentic context is really the place to start, not organizing all of that content in a carefully organized outline and hierarchy and then stepping people through it. That will just bore them to death, and it does.
Another thing that we wanted to focus on is that in typical e-learning, there is just way too much fact testing. But if we, the goal is to help our learners be able to perform in a on-the-job situation, in a future educational practice situation. And if we want to do that, the research is clear. To prepare people for performance situations, they need to engage in realistic practice and realistic decision making. And here's one of the keys. E-learning is really good at that. So we ought to be doing that more. Julie, I think it's your turn.
Yeah, so the next one is one size fits all versus individualized challenges, and we really debated the inclusion of this one because one of the big promises of e-learning way back since the very beginning, since the early Plato days and things like that, was this idea that we were somehow going to be able to customize the experience for individualized learners. That was one of the big points of using technology for learning experiences, and it's been one of the least realized promises of technology. And I think one of the issues with that is that people perceive it to be about things like artificial intelligence. The system will automatically serve up an experience for the learners based on their performance or based on their actions or based on the pretest or things like that, and that's just overwhelming to most people. The level of technology and the level of programming required for that is kind of out of scope for most people. But it doesn't actually have to be like that. As Michael was kind of mentioning, it's really annoying to have somebody tell you stuff that you already know. And so one of the other ways that we can think about individualized challenges is creating kind of scaffolded environments where you get to answer challenges, deal with questions, and if you know the answer, you can keep going. But if you don't know the answer, then you can access resources or you can access assistance or coaching or other kinds of scaffolding. And that's another way By giving learners more autonomy in their environments and more ability to decide what they're going to work on or how they're going to work on it, that we can give people more individualized experiences. Because I would agree that for most people, kind of an artificial intelligence environment's out of scope, but that doesn't mean that we can't leverage learners' intelligence to make experiences, to create environments that create more adaptive experiences for learners.
One of the other values that we wanted to bake into the manifesto was the notion of spaced practice. And this is based on the research finding on the spacing effect, which is, by the way, one of the most studied phenomena in the history of learning and memory research. But at the same time, it's one of the least utilized research-based opportunities in e-learning. The basic finding is this, that if you reinforce learning over time, that our learners remember better. And since sort of that's one of our goals as learning designers, we ought to be doing that. And again, e-learning is uniquely enabled to provide a connection to learners over time. So it's really something we ought to do. Michael, take the last one.
Thanks, Will. Real-world consequences. You know, the real-world performance that we all are in when we're awake isn't so much guided by knowing what's supposed to be right and what's supposed to be wrong, but it's guided by our assessment or expectations of what the consequences are going to be if we do something or if we don't do something. The world teaches us a lot, of course. But our choices can be remembered and sustained and applied so much more effectively in a variety of situations if the feedback we've gotten while we were being trained was in terms of real-world consequences. What actually happens when you do this thing might be a bad thing. If you see that happening, even if it's just described textually, but of course it's nicer if it's enriched with media, if you see that bad thing happening because of what you did, you're much more likely to remember it. And if you see a great success happening because of what you did, you're much more likely to remember it. Now, real-world consequences don't always happen as immediate feedback. You know, one decision and you're either a hero or you're a scum, you know. They're often delayed and you have to make multiple choices before you actually find out if you're on the right path or not. Well, that's what we need to do in our e-learning as well. To make them authentic, to make them real-world, you sometimes need to allow your learners to make several choices before they start to see, oh, this is happening. And if you can allow them to back up and correct themselves, that's so much better than saying, no, Susan, you should have chosen this other choice, now choose it now. You know, it's just a night and day difference in the impact. Well, that's our list. We readily admit that we may have overlooked some very important factors. There may be a bit of redundancy in our list, but we've looked at a lot of research, talked with people with a tremendous amount of experience who have guided us to put these lists together, and we feel that adherence, at least being aware of your choice not to apply and use these values, and deliberately choosing to do them, apply them, will make e-learning start to achieve far more of its potential that has been demonstrated, has been proven, but unfortunately seems in our haste to have so many people producing so much e-learning, it's swamped the real opportunity that we have. So we really sincerely hope this list is going to be helpful.
Well, you know, Michael, these are, it's a great list of values, and it's a great list of things that we all try to do or should be doing. And, you know, it's a little sad kind of mourning the demise of the click next to continue button. It's just not going to be the same. But you know, Julie, I'd like to ask you something. You brought up principles, and how do the values affect the principles we're talking about, or vice versa? How do the principles affect the value? How do we implement these?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these principles are good, but obviously we need to get into a little bit more detail about how you actually use them. And one of the things I just wanted to mention is this is really a tool for people to take and use in whatever way it's helpful to them. We've made it available with a Creative Commons license. It's attribution only, so they can use it in kind of any way that it's helpful to them. And in addition to the values, we also worked through about 20 principles. And there's an example of just one on the screen right now, principle number 4, which is target improved performance. But we really kind of said, all right, if people are going to actually start implementing these, we need to give them a little bit more than the kind of larger values. We want to get into a little bit more of the specifics about how to actually implement it. And so there's 20 principles. They're available on the website. And here's another one: use interactivity to prompt deep engagement, enable learners to learn from mistakes. All of these kinds of things that get into some more of the nitty-gritty detail of exactly what this is going to look like in order for it to be useful design guidelines.
Okay, now, Clark, this one's for you, and I'm kind of curious about this. I know you all have jobs, you're all really busy. I don't think you spent a lot of time in a bunker, just all 4 of you doing this, but how many other people were involved? Was it just you folks, or were there other people actually involved in the creation of this?
Rick, there's several things that go into this, and it wasn't 4 of us a bunker, except a virtual bunker in many ways. But what we were doing was culling, as Michael referred to, bunches of research done by researchers around the globe over decades, and our role was just to pull that in and try and figure out which ones we needed to emphasize to help what we think make the delta in the industry today. And as Julie pointed out, that whole list of background principles that support these initial values that provide guidance that you folks take on. So first of all, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Second of all, people like you, Rick, and Caitlin and Christopher have been fantastic help to us in trying to get the word out and figure out how to get the word out, and so that we can try and move the industry in a positive direction. And finally, 33 trustees, people who are representative of sectors in the industry, who are highly respected, agreed to stand with us as trustees for the Serious eLearning Manifesto. And they're not everybody we could and should have. They were people we could get to and trust to work with us on a quick basis and quick turnaround so we could get this out there. And we owe them a deep debt of gratitude, as well as for all the people who've helped and who are attending today. And we're not going to keep on nattering on much longer. We are going to give you time for questions as well.
That's great. And let's finish up with this one with Will. Will, I'm curious, what can people do and to implement this or to actually move forward with the manifesto, and what's your vision for this?
Well, thanks, Rick. What can people do? Well, the first thing that they can do is go to elearningmanifesto.org and read the manifesto. Then if they like it, we've actually enabled it so you can sign up as a signatory to make a public commitment to these principles. But then, again, if you like the manifesto, take it back to your team, reflect on it, debate it. But here's probably the most important thing. Benchmark your current e-learning programs based on the manifesto's 22 principles. Give yourself an honest reckoning, and then do a gap analysis. Where are you now, and where do you want to be, and how are you going to get there? Now, notice that this kind of work involves individuals throughout the e-learning industry. Now, the manifesto will be live today, and we're putting it out there to start a conversation. We invite you to join us in this effort. Now, before I hand this over to Rick, I just want to thank a couple people. Clark, did a good job on this, but I want to thank Rick and Clark Ostrander of Relate, Christopher Allen and Caitlin Campbell of Allen Interactions. They've done an amazing job developing the website, doing marketing, getting graphics. I also want to make a special thank you to Michael Allen for his special contributions and the other members of Allen Interactions, to our trustees who kept us on the straight and narrow, gave us a reality check, and also for our endorsing organizations, ASTD, the eLearning Guild, Training Magazine, and ISPI. And also one final thank you to my co-authors for being a great bunch of folks, for having fun and wrangling, and for being good people throughout this process. So Rick, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I think we're going to take some questions.
Yeah, we are at the point of finding out what you think and any questions you have for the team. And by the way, I'd like to thank all of you too. And it's hard to keep these four individuals from saying a lot. They talk a lot. They're really good at talking, and they kept it down. This is good. Now it's time for them to answer some good questions. So Caitlin is going to help us with the questions. And Caitlin, do you have any questions queued up?
Yeah, so I just wanted to preface it with we already have lots of questions coming in. But if you have questions yourself, feel free to use the Q&A on the Hangouts. You can also use the YouTube page where we're live streaming, as well as the Google Plus page. We also have people monitoring the Twitter accounts, and eLearning Manifesto is the hashtag. So I will start. Julie, the first question is from Michael in Texas, and he says, what can we do with this? I like this, but what can I do with the manifesto?
Right, and as Will mentioned, really we're hoping to provide some design guidelines to benchmark against. A lot of times I teach quite a few classes, and people come in and they are looking for basically ammunition to help them with their stakeholders, to explain why certain things are important, or why why it's going to take longer than a week to build an e-learning course, or any of those kinds of things. And so really the intention is to use this as a tool to help people do the things that I know that they already want to do, which is build, do good work and build good things. And as I mentioned earlier, we thought it was really important that we put a Creative Commons license on it, and it's attribution only, which means that people can use it for commercial purposes. If you want to structure a class around the manifesto, guess what? You can do that. It's really something that we wanted to put out there and make a free-to-use tool for the community to kind of help everybody do better, be better, explain to their managers, what's important or what's useful when they're trying to do good e-learning work.
Thank you so much, Julie. So the next question is actually from Michael, and somebody has written in and they said, I'm familiar with these values and I endorse them, but it's really hard to get support. How do I get support within my organization, and how do you think the manifesto is going to make a difference for me?
Well, that's a very common question, because I know many people feel boxed when they don't have the resources to work with. The expectations are get this out quickly with minimal fuss and make sure that there aren't a lot of complaints. So if that's the target you're given, you're in kind of a bad situation right away. And hoping that you can achieve some real performance improvement under those constraints is definitely difficult. I have tried different things myself, and I have suggested various approaches to people and asked that they give me some feedback on did this help you or did it not. And one of the things that seems to work the best is when you can get in front of the person who's setting the budget and setting the expectations. And that can be a trick, of course, just to get their time and attention. But assuming that you can do that, at least you have some voice. A short demonstration of two different approaches, and asking the person, which do you think is going to benefit our organization the most? Which training would you attend to if you're giving up your paid time where you could be serving clients or producing widgets or whatever it is, would be the smartest investment? You very often will have those people say, gee, I wouldn't like this boring thing that you showed me. I mean, I can see why you don't want to do that. So what's it really going to take to do this other thing, and this better thing? There are, on many websites out there, there are demonstrations of people's work. If you don't have any of your own, you can go find it. And if you need to, it's usually pretty quick effort to take something that's well done and downgrade it to text to next, which we call it, which is just a bunch of bullet points and then some quizzes at the end. And then you'll have your you'll have your example, counter example that you can put in front of people. That can really, really help. And then, of course, the principles that we've listed here are all based on extensive research. This is not just personal preference, but these things are proven out to be successful, whereas the typical are also proven not to be successful in most situations. And so sometimes a research-based analysis can work too. But I think the best is the demonstration. Put somebody who's a decision maker through something that's really pretty boring, and then show them the example of what it really could be. Have them think about it from a business perspective now. We're not just talking about learning theory, but seeing how effective that investment of time can be. And you may get your opportunity to at least move a little bit in the right direction, with hope that the next one you'll have more latitude and onward.
Thank you. I think that probably answered Tess's question rather well. There's a lot of questions coming in about, is this being recorded? And yes, it is. So we'll make sure to let everyone have a link to that after this is all wrapped up today. So moving on, another question I have, and Will, this one's for you. I know you're going to answer it great. Is this just one big publicity stunt? I mean, are you guys doing this right now because you want to sell a book or something?
Thanks for giving me that question, Caitlin. Well, it is true that we are as gorgeous as celebrity publicity seekers, but I want to assure everyone that we are not the Kardashians. First of all, me and the other three authors, we don't think we really deserve much accolades for this or any publicity bump, because we're just compilers. We've just taken the wisdom of thousands of others, research scientists, world-class e-learning developers, and compiled it, and we're putting it out there. So no. I know these people that I've been working with, Michael, Julie, and Clark, and they're good people. When we get together, we got started on this because we were frustrated, and we see each other at conferences and things. And over the years, we've just been griping about the state of e-learning. How come it's not getting better? You think it gets better, but maybe it's getting worse. And so really, we started with that goal of trying to do something, do anything. In fact, when we were talking about this, we even got advice from a lawyer that we ought to protect the Manifesto. We ought to form a limited liability corporation, and then there was talk about getting copyrights on this to protect it against commercial exploitation and having people take advantage. But as the authors were talking, to each other, we said, we want people to take advantage. We want people to run with this, and if people go out there and make money teaching workshops on this, or if vendors, create e-learning that's aligned with the Manifesto and they go out and advertise it as Manifesto compliant, that's great. So look, we wanted to get some publicity to get people interested in this, but it's definitely not a publicity stunt.
Thanks, Will. I think that gives us a good segue for a question that I'm going to ask Clark, which is, you want people to go out and take this and use the Manifesto for themselves, but somebody said the Manifesto idea seems a little bit restrictive, a little harsh. Won't this limit the creativity that we can apply to our own e-learning?
And I understand that question, because it seems like such a restrictive set of principles, but what I see it as, that sort of question is asking, are you putting a ceiling on what we can do? And absolutely not. What we want to do The most powerful examples we see are wildly creative. They're deeply immersive, engaging. They look and feel like games. We don't want to stop that. Alternate reality games distributed throughout the world using mobile devices, those can follow these principles. What we're trying to do is not close off the scene. We're trying to raise the floor. We don't want the bad stuff to keep happening. We want to start lifting that lowest stuff. When Will talked about the bottom of the ocean, we want to raise the bottom of the ocean and lift the whole game. And we believe that those principles, when Michael's talking about deep, authentic context and real feedback, these are powerful and engaging environments. They don't constrain us in any meaningful way. Instead, they are the spark to start doing much more creative, embedded, minimalist, wildly engaging and effective activities.
Do we have any more questions right now, Caitlin?
Yeah, we are having a lot of them come in. So, Julie, this one is for you. It's a question that says, is this just about self-study e-learning?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because we didn't really show these principles, but some of the first principles that we had were it's not e-learning is not or learning and development is not always the answer. Sometimes you need performance support. Sometimes you need to fix the process. Sometimes you need to clarify goals. The second principle is that even when learning and development is the answer, e-learning isn't always the answer. Sometimes there are really good reasons why you would want to do some other format, maybe social learning, or maybe blended, or maybe there's a good reason why you would want to do classroom. So we're not, one of the things we wanted to be clear is we're not saying that e-learning is the answer to all things or even that it should be. However, when you are doing e-learning, when it is an appropriate answer, there are good ways to do it. And so what we were really kind of looking for is fundamental learning principles, and I think that there's definitely kind of a focus on sort of asynchronous self-study, but at the same time, almost everything that we get talked about is, the vast majority of what we talk about is actually applicable as learning principles across a broader view, but we were really very much focusing on the problem of specifically, e-learning as it frequently gets implemented.
Thanks so much, Julie. The next question I think I'm going to direct towards Michael. And the question comes in, he says, what if we can't implement all the 22 principles? Or what if we just can't implement them right away? Does that make us a bad people?
Very bad, very bad. That's well quit. I said yesterday, if anybody implemented all of these principles all the time, they'd be both a saint and dead. It's quite a big undertaking, no doubt. And what I'd like to think is that over time we become more efficient and effective at implementing a bigger subset of them, and eventually being able to take on the majority of them. There's in a lot of the e-learning that I see, and by the way, let me just make a little comment about this. I can have conversations about these principles with people at conferences, and do very often, and people talk about, maybe not in the same jargon, but these concepts or principles quite often as so extremely important, and it really guides their work. And I get always very enthusiastic to see yet another example of something done well, and so we go off and take a look at it. And in too many of the cases, I'm just kind of dumbfounded. I don't know what to say, because it appears that the person understands and appreciates these values, but then implements something that I just don't see how it's related. It's kind of nothing there. So it would help our whole industry if people would just start to implement one of them, and then another one, and another one. Just a small subset of these would produce products that are more effective than the typical sort of thing that I see, which again is generally just far too focused on dishing out a tremendous amount of content hoping that people will remember it, be able to answer questions on a post-test, and be done. And most everybody's going to forget that material right after the post-test. They're not going to recognize contexts in which they should perform a task differently, and so on. With risk of going back over this material again, I think you'll see tremendous improvement in the effectiveness of what you do by just adding 1 or 2 principles, and then hopefully on your next project keeping those and adding a couple more. And you won't be a bad person if we say, well, didn't implement number 7 or 20.
That's good. I think, Caitlin, we have time for one more question.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think a good question, and it's been asked a few different times, and it's been +1 a bunch. And I'm going to give this one to Will because he previously talked about it. But someone says, can you please describe what space practice as a means to reinforce learning is?
Sure. So space practice is one aspect of what the spacing effect does. And the spacing effect is the finding that if you repeat something, if you repeat it over a length of time as opposed to repeating it all close in time, that people will remember a lot better. And space practice is one aspect about that. It's just spacing your practice over time. So let me give you an example. So let's say you have a 90-minute e-learning program. So you can introduce a topic in the first 5 minutes, and then bring it back in minute 25, and then bring it back in minute 40, and then maybe bring it back in minute 80. So you're repeating it that way. Now you're not using verbatim repetitions. You're varying those repetitions. You're using different background contexts. But it's a very simple concept. And the research on this is quite amazing. There's over like 300 studies that have been done on this in the past 30 years because it's such an interesting finding from the researchers. They want to know, why does it work this way? We don't care why it works this way. We just know that it works, and we ought to implement it.
And actually, we have probably 12 more minutes to ask questions, so I was wrong.
We'll go to the
top of the hour on this. So, Caitlin, do you have anything else?
Yeah, and I actually like this question a lot for Clark. Clark, somebody writes in, there is a big challenge that none of you have addressed. People of all ages are multitasking around the clock, and their perception is that they're being really productive. Research, however, indicates that they feel that way, but they're not actually learning more. They're learning less. What do you think about this?
Well, I agree. I mean, the research is clear that multitasking, cognitively, what you're doing is you're putting on hold your current state, which takes some extra effort, and then you're switching to a different task and having to reactivate that state, which takes some extra effort, and then as you have to put that back on the stack. And so as you multitask, you end up having this extra overhead that effectively slows you down in the long run. But to me, the implication of that for serious e-learning is, does that mean that this space practice is just another form of multitasking? And I think that's not the case. The case is, and the evidence is there that this works, but it's also that the way our cognitive architecture works is that we activate relationships between patterns as the way that learning happens inside the brain. But only so much activation can happen in any one day when effectively you literally have to sleep before you can do more activation. And so learning, you can only do so much learning in one day before you have to have a night's sleep and start again the next day, and spacing out over time. And I loved one of the things Will said in his report on space learning, which was, people always ask, well, how much practice and how much, how long do I got to keep reactivating this? And his answer, I thought, was real eloquent. It depends on how complex the performance is and how big are the gaps before you practice it. The consultant's answer, it depends, but I always like to at least tell you what it depends on. So I don't think that's a challenge. In fact, I think the multitasking actually helps, and particularly as we start moving to really intriguing concepts like alternate reality games, where we start having these things penetrate our lives at different times, we can mend engagement and space practice and contextual performance in really powerful and effective ways that match what technology enables in ways that we haven't been able to before.
Great, and that is a really important one, and I think Julie, you could probably expound upon that, correct?
Yeah, one of the issues with multitasking is that so many current e-learning experiences are essentially passive experiences. You're sitting there and things are being projected at you. And the temptation to multitask when you're in a passive experience is pretty high. I have it too. I actually feel that temptation as well. And so a lot of the principles that we talk about lead towards learning experiences that are more active for the learners. They're actually doing something as part of the learning experience. And when you can design for that, that helps a lot with the multitasking problem. If people aren't just sitting there, then they're, and if they're actually doing something as part of their learning experience, they're far less likely to feel the urge or the need to multitask or even feel like it's feasible for them. So that's one of the big, I think that's one of the big issues with that. If you're just watching a webinar, well, yeah, it is really tempting to check your email while you're doing it and get a few other things done. So that's I think, part of how the manifesto can help with that problem.
Great. Then Michael, I'm going to ask you this one. So somebody writes in that this all seems great, maybe too great. It's pretty idealistic and maybe impractical. I mean, what about real-world constraints like budgets and timelines?
Well, we did talk about that a little bit before, but I think one of the big advantages of e-learning and the technology is that it can be an ongoing experiment where you can implement the best you can within your initial constraints, time or budget or other resources, and then see how it works and come back and change it, build it again. In fact, that was one of the things I believe way back in the very early days of using technology that inspired the early workers, that we could reach a much higher level of perfection in instruction because we're writing the logic for teaching into the code of our programs. That's much better than trying to advise classroom teachers, we'd like you all to do this and do it this way. As we all know, those of us who've been teachers, things come up that cause you to do things differently. I mean, it can be such things as you're tired, you have a headache, or you have a student that asks an important and interesting question, but it's really going to throw off your schedule and your direction, and you don't know what to do about it. You have some learners that are very slow and they're pulling people down. You have some fast learners that are anxious to move on and expressing that. All of this is very difficult. So there are so many factors to deal with that I'd have to say, going to the other extreme based on your question, if you had no restrictions, you'd still have problems of making it perfect. But in e-learning, you have the advantage of iteratively perfecting it. So you put out a first version, you test it, you hopefully have some future resources and time, and you come back and you give it another try and you improve it. And it's going to not forget. It's always going to do the same thing every time. It's going to be fair for every learner, no biases, and you can get it to a point of a high level of effectivity in that approach. So that's another way of looking at the constraints. They don't have to be the constraints for all time.
Great, and hopefully this next question for Will can help people start doing this, which is, Will, is there going to be a manifesto community per se, one there where we can continue the conversation and learn from each other along the way?
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, the authors and I and our trustees are hoping to take this out and talk about it, to get other people to talk about it. What I imagine is that there's going to be sort of a lot of, we're going to try to create a community at elearningmanifesto.org. But in addition to that, I see many separate communities. For example, I can see conferences getting together and having sessions on the manifesto's principle, debating them. I can see graduate schools having courses on the manifesto's principles, getting their faculty and graduate students together to debate things. You know, one of the things that we sort of hope would come of the manifesto is that people would use it in ways that are useful to them. So, for example, buyers of e-learning, people like chief learning officers, training managers, even CEOs, anybody who's buying e-learning can now point to the manifesto's principles and say, hey, I don't want our regular old e-learning. I don't want that page-turning stuff. I want e-learning that looks more like what's on the manifesto. You know, if you are a vendor, an e-learning vendor, you know, you've got a community of people that are connected with you. You can use the manifesto to say, hey, look at the manifesto's principles. This is the kind of e-learning that we'd like to develop for you. And if you're an internal shop building e-learning in a big organization, you can say, hey, you know, I know that you're asking us to build one type of e-learning, but we think we can build better e-learning. And by pointing to the manifesto, maybe those internal shops can get more resources, more support for doing e-learning in a better way. So, you know, we're going to try to build a community, but we obviously can't do this alone. We are putting the manifesto out there to start many, many communities, many, many conversations.
Thanks, Will. That was an excellent question to end on. So for the Q&A section, there's still a lot coming in, but we'll try to answer those back channel, and I'm going to turn it over to Rick here.
Well, again, thank you all for coming here today. We've spent an hour together and shared some thoughts, some values, and what can you do now? Well, go to the www.elearningmanifesto.org website, read the manifesto, share it with your team, share it with clients, share it with whomever you feel wants to talk about it and wants to improve e-learning, wants to make e-learning better. Make it much more useful. And other than that, we really hope you enjoyed it today. We hope you participate in the manifesto principles, if you will. Join those communities as they come up, and we wish all of you a really good day. Thanks for being here. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.